Mother? Let's just say we're very hard to...
One day in Morocco, Andy meets Booker, who gives her a job offer from a CIA agent, James Copley. They heads to a hotel to discuss the matter with two other colleagues, Joe and Nikki. By the way, the four of them are former high-skilled soldiers who often get calls to carry out rescue missions. As a senior, Andy did not just accepted the offer. She asked to meet Copley in person at a market nearby. Copley explained about the task of rescuing several miners who were being held hostage by armed militias in South Sudan. After hearing plausible explanation from Copley, Andy accepted the mission. They go to the location by helicopter. At night they are right in front of the enemy's defense camp. Slowly push in, knocking out one by one the patrollers there. Their skills are very qualified, even though the costumes they wear doesn't describe who they really are. A few minutes of walking, they're astonished by situation that suddenly turns silent. Even when they go down the dungeon, no one is there. And suddenly a group of special forces emerge from the darkness and brutally strafe them. As a result, Andy and his colleagues fall. But a few seconds later there's a very surprising phenomenon. The four of them seem to get a magic injection, so they get up and attack back until the special forces fall apart. Unfortunately, the hostages they are looking for are no longer there. And in fact, the mission is a trap designed to prove the existence of Andy's group strength all along. Long story short, they left the location earlier and changed the clothes they wore in the battle earlier. Now their physical condition has fully recovered without the slightest scar. A look of disappointment appears on Andy's face as they conclude that a global elite has detected their true identity, including Copley. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, Niall Freeman and a number of U.S. Marines are conducting a search for a rebel figure. Soon the target is found, thanks to information from an old woman. A shootout takes place before the target is shot down. Niall immediately gives first aid to the target so she could bring him alive. But unexpectedly the target attacks Niall with a knife, inflicting a severe wound on his neck, and she dies on the spot. While in another place, Andy and three of her friends decide to return to Morocco to look for Copley, but at the same time, they all dream about the figure of Niall, which turn out still alive after the deadly incident. Simultaneously they jolt awake, because for them such a dream is a sign of the arrival of a new member. It's only in the last 200 years that anyone had been bestowed such greatness, and that's Niall. Andy traces Niall's identity according to the clue in her dream. Scene moves to a Marine base camp in Afghanistan. The Marines who witnessed the Niall stabbing incident do not believe that Niall is still alive, especially after they see no sword wounds at all on Niall's body. Of course, everyone is surprised by this phenomenon. Meanwhile, in England, Dr. Stephen Merrick, a CEO of a well-known pharmaceutical company, is presenting a major project on efforts to extend human life beyond the average age. Apparently, Copley is behind Merrick's plans. It is proven when he gives a recording of the massacre of Andy and his friends in Sudan. It seems that Andy and his friends will be the objects of testing by Merrick, so he then pressures Copley to bring the four extraordinary people to Merrick immediately before his business competitors precede him. Meanwhile, Niall has returned to activity even though her comrades treat her differently, and even her commander orders her to be re-medical tested in Germany. Since then Niall feels uncomfortable being among the troops, so she chooses to be alone behind the tent, and when the officers come to pick her up for a medical, suddenly Andy appears and snatches her from the officers and takes her away. Niall, who doesn't know Andy, tries to run away. But Andy doesn't let her go. She doesn't even hesitate to shoot Niall in the head. Niall is gripped by surprise, knowing that the gunshot wound to her head recovers quickly. Her logic can't understand what she's going through, and that's why she decides to go with Andy to get an answer to this weirdness. They fly to Paris on the plane Andy has prepared. On the way, Niall says that she doesn't believe everything Andy says, so they have a big fight. It isn't until Andy injures her legs and arms, and Niall witnesses the wounds heal quickly, did she realize that there's a power beyond common sense that has coalesced within her. Long story short, they both arrive at the hideout of Booker, Joe, and Nikki, in Gauzenville, an abandoned place on the outskirts of Paris, and Niall is convinced by everybody there that they are actually soldiers from the past who are bestowed with immortal abilities or the ability to survive for a very long time. For example, Booker, who has lived since the time of Napoleon, Joe, and Nikki since the Crusades, and even Andy is much older than all of them. They are also able to detect the emergence of new members through dreams. Because of the genetic similarity, it's no wonder that after 200 years they are also able to find Niall. The burden of life for people like them is very heavy, for they have to feel the pain of suffering in eternal life. That's what happened to Andy's comrade in arms, who was sentenced by the British Empire 500 years ago, and until now he is still living the rest of his immortality in a state of being imprisoned in a steel frame at the bottom of the ocean. After hearing the story, Niall decides to leave because she feels trapped in a very dire situation. But Andy reminds her again that this is an uncontested destiny. Meanwhile, Copley has discovered their hiding place and sends troops to capture them. Realizing the situation, Andy immediately returns home. It turns out that Joe and Nikki have been kidnapped and Booker is lying with his stomach crushed by a grenade explosion.
Hey, Booker.
Shortly the troops come back to capture Andy, but she is ready. A strange battle ensued, where Andy, who's alone, is able to slaughter all members of the squad. Andy then takes Brooke and Niall to another hiding place, a bunker that she had found in 1950. Merrick, who is very ambitious with his pharmaceutical project, seems happy to welcome Copley, who delivers his 2 catches. Without hesitation, he directly injures Nikki to ensure the authenticity of the experimental object. After being considered convincing, both of them are then sedated to have their genetic code taken. While in the bunker, Andy is surprised to see the wound from last night's fight is still bleeding and not healing as fast as usual. She secretly goes to the pharmacy to treat her wound. On the way home, the image of one of his former friends who eventually died flashes in her mind. Andy is sure that this will also happen to her. In Merrick's laboratory, a doctor begins to collect samples of Nikki's and Joe's blood and tissue to uncover the secrets of their genetic code. Merrick is already seeing huge benefits. On the other hand, Andy promises to save Joe and Nikki soon, no matter what. They head to a place in England that is supposed to be where Merrick lives, but Niall chooses to resign because she feels unable to carry out this mission. And this time Andy let her go and gives her a gun that doesn't actually have a bullet. Andy breaks into the house and she sees Copley on the 2nd floor. She points the gun and asks him the whereabouts of Joe and Nikki. But unexpectedly a shot pierced her stomach. To her surprise, the shooter is Booker. It turns out that Copley has been researching and learning how this group survived for a long time, until he gets help from one of its members. He is Booker. Booker wants to help because he hopes that Merrick will find a way to stop the suffering of people like them, that is immortality. Sadly, Booker doesn't know at that time that Andy's immortal abilities are starting to decrease. He just realized when he sees Andy's bleeding don't stop and feels guilty.
She's not healing.
Shortly Merrick comes and forces the 2 of them. No matter Andy's condition was like a human in general, Copley got in the way because it was outside the agreement and could endanger Andy's life. But Merrick doesn't care about what Copley said. Merrick orders tests to continue, regardless of Andy's condition at the time. Meanwhile, Copley is visited by Niall, who finally decides to follow in Andy's footsteps. Niall was astonished to learn from Copley how heavily involved Andy was in many of the world's defining events so far, and Copley admits he regrets having caused this group to be experimented with by greedy people like Merrick. To atone for guilt, Copley takes Niall to the building where Andy and the group are tested. After a short brief of the building situation from Copley, Niall goes to the 15th floor. She doesn't need long time to get past the guards. Finally she finds the lab room and saved all her friends.
Niall!
They unite forces to hunt down Merrick. Their collaboration is so epic when they have to bring down their opponents while continuing to protect Andy, who is no longer immortal. A Molotov cocktail exploded in front of them, but it can't stop them. Andy even proves her toughness by continuing to fight with the rest of her strength. Finally, they arrived in the hall where Merrick was supposed to be hiding. A precise strategy with an accurate combination of attacks managed to finish off the entire army until Merrick was left alone. Booker, Joe, and Nikki hunt for Merrick, who they think has escaped down the stairs in an elevator, while Niall accompanies Andy for a short break. At that moment, Merrick, who was hiding, appeared, and immediately pointed the gun toward Andy. Merrick is actually in a corner situation where he only had the choice of surrendering or daring to attack alone. And it seems he doesn't really know who the two women he's dealing with are. Niall pushes Merrick and they fall from the building onto the roof of a car. Niall of course survives, although it takes some time to get up.
It's okay, Niall.
When everything returns to normal, Andy takes the group for a drink at a bar. Niall officially left the Mariner and joins Andy, while Booker must bear the consequences of his act. He cannot see them for 100 years.